You know that feeling when the world just doesn't seem to make as much sense as it used to?
Yeah, things feel different.
Shifting.
Exactly. Well, we're diving headfirst into that today. This deep dive is all about the new Cold War, what it actually looks like in 2025. With the U.S. seemingly on one side and this sort of Russia-China connection on the other.
It's a complicated picture.
For sure. We've sifted through a pile of expert analysis, including those annual threat assessments from the ODNI, and reports from think tanks like CSIS and the Carnegie Endowment.
Some heavy-hitting sources there.
Definitely. So our mission for you today is pretty simple: to unpack the core of this new era and really understand how it's playing out differently than, say, the Cold War our parents or grandparents might remember. Let's get to it.
Sounds good. And it's fascinating. We're even using that Cold War label again, isn't it?
Yeah.
New Cold War or Cold War II?
Yeah.
It immediately paints a picture, right? Escalating global tensions in our 21st century.
A real challenge to the status quo. Yeah, a clear challenge to the way things have been since, well, the early 90s, when the U.S. was pretty much the undisputed global leader. The material we're looking at consistently points to this central dynamic: the United States navigating this complex and increasingly aligned partnership between China and Russia.
Right. And it's not just a straight-up rematch, is it? The original Cold War felt very bipolar, U.S. versus the Soviet Union.
Very much so.
But what jumps out from these sources is that this feels much more spread out, diffuse, almost like a three-player game, maybe even more complex than that.
Potentially multipolar, yeah.
And the competition isn't solely about military might anymore, like it maybe once was. We're seeing a real battle for who's ahead in technology, who holds the most economic cards.
Economic influence, definitely.
And even whose ideas about how the world should work are gaining traction. Think about the efforts to build influence in places like Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia. It's about winning over countries, their people, and, crucially, access to their markets.
It really is a multi-domain competition. And if we step back for a moment, the way the term New Cold War has evolved is quite revealing.
How so?
Well, initially, after 9/11, some analysts used it to describe, the global fight against terrorism. Then, as Russia and the West began to clash more openly, maybe around 2008.
Georgia?
Right, the term resurfaced. But now it's primarily used to frame the growing rivalry between the U.S. and China, especially in hot spots like the South China Sea and just the broader context of China challenging the U.S. superpower status.
It's become the dominant framing.
Pretty much. It's interesting that by June 2022, even NATO officially recognized China's actions as, quote, systemic challenges.
It almost feels like this new Cold War just sort of crept in. No formal announcement, no clear starting bell.
That's a really good point.
And the lack of a definitive moment when it began seems to be a key characteristic itself, according to our sources. It makes it harder for countries to coordinate their strategies when there's no shared understanding of exactly what it is or when it started.
That ambiguity complicates everything. And when we talk about this Russia-China axis, it's really important to understand it's not the same kind of unified ideological bloc we saw with the Soviets and their allies.
Not monolithic.
Not at all. The analysis suggests it's more accurately described as a coalition of convenience. Their main shared interest seems to be pushing back against what they see as U.S. dominance, U.S. hegemony.
Okay.
But if you look closer, the power balance within this coalition isn't equal at all.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. The sources we've looked at consistently emphasize that China is, well, the ascendant power in this partnership.
Definitely the stronger economic player.
Right, much stronger economic foundation, more advanced technological base. Russia, while still a significant military power, of course, seems increasingly reliant on China for tech, for economic support, especially given the ongoing situation in Ukraine.
That reliance is growing. This asymmetry raises a really important question for U.S. strategists, doesn't it?
How to approach them differently.
Exactly. The analysis suggests that a nuanced approach is essential. You have the long-term challenge posed by China, with its growing economic and tech might. That needs to be differentiated from the more immediate sort of disruptive capabilities that Russia can deploy.
They aren't interchangeable problems?
None at all. Requires different solutions, different strategies.
So if we boil it down, What does this new Cold War actually look like on the ground? It's not tanks massing on borders in the old way, right?
Well, not primarily, no. The sources describe it more as this constant state of simmering tensions. You see breaches of international norms, you see proxy wars, and yes, an ongoing arms race.
But it's also playing out in other arenas.
Absolutely. Intense competition for technological dominance through complex economic interdependence and in the battle for global influence. It's this continuous, multifaceted struggle where everything feels connected.
Yeah, like you impose trade sanctions and suddenly you're dealing with ripples through global supply chains.
Precisely. It's a much more intricate and, I think, riskier environment because of all these interconnected parts. Miscalculation becomes a bigger danger.
Okay, so to really get a handle on what's happening now,
Yeah.
we need to look beyond just the surface similarities to the original Cold War.
Exactly. The sources we've consulted highlight some really crucial differences, starting maybe with the role of ideology.
Right. The old Cold War had this very stark divide, didn't it? Democratic capitalism versus communism. Pretty clear lines.
You generally knew where countries stood ideologically.
But now the ideological landscape feels much fuzzier. We still see tensions between democratic and more authoritarian models, sure, but it's not as black and white.
How so?
Well, China, for instance, operates with a market-driven economy but under very strong state control. And Russia. It's pushing a kind of nationalism, traditionalism, anti-Western sentiment.
But not really exporting a coherent global ideology like communism aimed to be.
Exactly. It feels less like an ideological crusade.
What's fascinating here, I think, is that this blurring of ideological lines means the conflict is less about converting the world to a specific belief system and more about a fundamental competition for power.
Spheres of influence, shaping the rules.
Exactly. Establishing spheres of influence, shaping the rules of the international order. And this also leads to more flexible alliances. Countries form partnerships based on shared, often pragmatic interests rather than deep ideological alignment.
Like the Russia-China relationship you mentioned.
Right. It seems largely driven by their shared opposition to the current U.S.-led system and some clear mutual benefits, not necessarily a deep ideological bond.
Which might make their long-term unity less certain.
Potentially. But it also allows them greater adaptability in forming, say, temporary coalitions on specific issues. More fluid.
Okay, so less about a clash of grand ideologies, more about a shifting global power structure. The original Cold War was very bipolar, two dominant superpowers, their alliances.
Very structured in a way.
But now, our sources point to a more multipolar, or at least tripolar, world. U.S., China, Russia as major players, sure. But you also have increasingly influential regional powers.
Right.
Even non-state actors can have a huge impact.
Absolutely. This diffusion of power creates a much more complex and, frankly, unpredictable global environment. It's not as simple as just choosing a side anymore.
More players, more friction points.
Exactly.
And then we have the economic dimension. That seems like a huge difference. During the original Cold War, economic interaction between the two sides was minimal, right? Largely separate spheres.
Very separate, almost walled off.
But today, the U.S. and China are just deeply intertwined economically. Trade, investment, complex supply chains. It's massive.
Huge interdependence. But now
Now we're seeing this significant push towards strategic decoupling, or maybe de-risking is the term.
Yeah.
Especially in key tech and industrial sectors.
that's the crucial dynamic now. This deep economic entanglement acts as both a potential brake on outright conflict.
Because it would hurt everyone.
Right. But it's also a new and very potent arena for competition. Trade wars, sanctions, battles over investments, they all become economic weapons in this new Cold War.
The IMF warned about this, didn't they? Back in late 2023, talking about fragmentation leading to a potential Cold War too.
They did, warning it could significantly harm global trade and economic growth.
It's this strange situation, maybe like mutually assured economic disruption. It's a deterrent, but a very different kind than nuclear deterrent.
A very different dynamic. And it also creates new ways for countries to exert pressure. Think about those semiconductor export controls we've seen.
Yeah, huge impact.
So the current efforts to decouple or de-risk are really about trying to reduce vulnerabilities, limit reliance on the economic leverage of rivals. Even though completely untangling these economies is incredibly difficult, maybe impossible.
Okay, let's shift to technology. This feels like another massive area of difference. Tech was important in the original Cold War, sure, nuclear race, space race.
Absolutely central in some ways.
But the new Cold War seems uniquely defined by this intense, pervasive competition in digital and emerging technologies. AI, quantum computing, 5G, biotech, cybersecurity.
Things that barely existed back then or were in their infancy.
Right. And unlike the Soviet era, the United States doesn't seem to have that clear, unchallenged technological lead anymore. China's emerged as a serious competitor.
A pure competitor in many areas, potentially ahead in some specifics.
The sources we've looked at really underscore that this tech race isn't just about military stuff either. It's fundamentally about building the infrastructure for the future global economy, future society.
It really is. Whoever takes the lead in areas like AI, 5G, quantum, they could be setting global standards, controlling information flows, wielding a whole new kind of global influence.
The stakes feel incredibly high there.
Immense.
Finally, let's touch on the nature of conflict itself. Proxy wars were a hallmark of the original Cold War.
Almost defining, yeah.
We still see elements of it, yet Ukraine is a stark example. But the new Cold War seems to encompass a much broader spectrum of conflict.
Definitely. We're seeing a return of the risk of direct conventional warfare between major powers, which is worrying, but also the pervasive use of hybrid warfare tactics, sophisticated disinformation campaigns, constant cyber conflict,
The wider
and a
toolkit.
much wider and perhaps more dangerous toolkit. And the potential intensity of a direct conflict, say, between the U.S. and China in the Indo-Pacific, could be significantly higher because of the concentration of advanced military tech in specific areas. It's different from the more geographically dispersed conflicts of the past.
Okay, so when we talk about the battlefronts of 2025, it's clearly not just one single place or method.
Not at all. Our sources consistently show it's a multi-domain engagement. It spans the digital realm, physical territories, economic systems, information flows, technological advancements. It's everywhere.
Let's start with what often feels like the invisible battlefield, cyber warfare.
Yeah, it's truly striking just how pervasive and constant this digital battleground has become. Nations are continuously probing, attacking, defending, using increasingly sophisticated digital tools for everything from espionage and IP theft.
Causing major disruption.
Exactly, and attempting to manipulate public opinion, too.
The 2025 ODNI threat assessment really lays this out starkly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It calls out both Russia and China as persistent cyber threats.
But with some distinctions.
Right. China is labeled the most active and persistent, targeting government, private sector, critical infrastructure, basically aiming for strategic advantage, including related to Taiwan.
While Russia, also highly capable, is maybe seen as more likely to integrate cyber with conventional military actions. And there's that ongoing concern about them pre-positioning malware in U.S. infrastructure.
A constant threat simmering below the surface.
And it's not just direct state attacks. The sources also highlight the continuing threat from ransomware. Often criminal groups, maybe financially motivated.
Possibly tolerated or even indirectly supported by states.
That's the suspicion in some cases. And the real-world consequences are severe. That mid-2024 ransomware attack on a major U.S. healthcare payment processor, that really hit home. Disrupted prescriptions, patient care.
A chilling example. And the wave of attacks in March 2025 hitting NYU, GitHub, even the Polish Space Agency shows how widespread it is.
And the PowerSchool data breach in late 2024 affecting thousands of schools globally, the scale can be massive.
It feels like the tactics are constantly evolving, too. Our sources are predicting more use of AI, right? For more convincing phishing, cloned identities for social engineering.
Makes it much harder to detect. And this concept of state-sponsored hacktivism is really interesting and concerning.
Blurring the lines.
Exactly, between independent activists and government proxies. Makes attribution incredibly difficult. A Forescout analysis in 2024 linked many hacktivist attacks to geopolitics, like Russia-Ukraine, targeting transport and logistics.
And the attacks on critical infrastructure seem particularly worrying. Operational technology, industrial control systems.
Yes, the systems controlling power grids, water utilities. Between late 2023 and mid-2024, there were reports of at least 36 attacks on U.S. OT and ICS, focusing on water but also hitting healthcare, energy, manufacturing.
And there's evidence that these APT groups, the sophisticated state actors and hacktivists, might even be sharing intel and infrastructure.
That's the really concerning part, using hacktivism as a smokescreen for state actions.
It provides that layer of deniability.
Precisely. Pursue strategic goals without triggering a major international response. And targeting critical infrastructure isn't just about data theft. It's about disruption, eroding trust, creating leverage.
The healthcare payment example shows the real-world impact.
Vividly. And the rapid evolution of tactics AI, living off the land, attacks using existing tools, it demands adaptive security. Things like zero-trust architectures become crucial.
Basically, trust nothing, verify everything.
In a nutshell, yeah.
Okay, Moving from the digital to more traditional power projection. Military posturing is still absolutely central, especially in key flashpoints. Ukraine obviously continues to be a major arena.
A real testing ground for modern warfare, isn't it? High-tech capabilities mixed with brutal attritional fighting.
We've seen Western nations supply advanced weapons, but our sources suggest financial support might be showing strain recently. No major new packages since that G7 loan in mid-2024.
That's a point of concern. Meanwhile, Ukraine has shown incredible ingenuity, with the drones reportedly making $1.5 million in 2024, aiming for triple that in 2025. And those naval drones, like the Magura V5,
Game changers in the Black Sea.
definitely. Russia, though, is adapting tactics and tech quickly and seems absolutely stuck on its maximalist war aims. Full capitulation, territorial demands.
Peace talks seem completely stalled. Russia just reiterated its demands in May 2025.
Sadly, yes, no real progress there.
And if we connect Ukraine to other potential hotspots, the situation around Taiwan, the pressure there has escalated significantly, systematically.
Massively. Taiwan's own MOD described recent PLA actions as the most aggressive incursions since 2021. January 2025 reportedly saw a record 248 PLA aircraft cross the median line.
That's huge, 1.75 times the previous peak.
Yeah, and an unprecedented 200 warships detected nearby. The PLA's Joint Combat Readiness patrols are more frequent, wider scope, long range into the Western Pacific, drone encirclements reported in 2025.
Even during quieter periods like Lunar New Year.
Even then, more median line crossings in 2025 than 2024 during that period. Analysts suggest it's a shift towards establishing operational dominance, a sustained presence, normalizing PLA activity much closer to Taiwan.
Almost like boiling a frog.
That's one interpretation. Plus, there's that ongoing, extensive Chinese espionage campaign against Taiwan. Reports mention over 5,000 spies seen as part of war preparation.
And then there's the South China Sea, still incredibly tense.
Very contested. China keeps militarizing those artificial islands, pushing the 9-line claim aggressively, leading to constant confrontational encounters, especially with the Philippines.
We saw reports in 2024 of Chinese Coast Guard and militia clashing with Philippine resupply missions, like at Second Thomas Shoal, coercive actions at Scarborough Shoal, too.
And that ramming incident in September 2024 with a U.S. news crew on board the Philippine vessel, very provocative.
The PLA is also ramping up exercises there.
Significantly. Roughly double the drills in late 2024 compared to 2023, and deploying 2 carrier strike groups there for the first time in 2024.
How's the U.S. responding?
Bolstering its presence, more joint exercises with allies, like Balikatan with the Philippines' 14,000 troops in 2025, focusing on South China Sea and Taiwan scenarios, even on the Batan's Islands near Taiwan.
And deploying advanced missiles to the Philippines, Typhoon and Assisi.
Sending a strong deterrent signal. These U.S.-Philippine activities, often with Australia and Japan, the Squad, are central to countering China.
It feels like Ukraine is this real-time lab for military adaptation, drones, electronic warfare, AI targeting.
And China is watching very closely, you can be sure, drawing lessons for Taiwan. Their Taiwan activities seem less reactive now, more sustained pressure, creating that new normal, maybe desensitizing everyone, while practicing for potential blockade or invasion.
So the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy really hinges on these alliances, the Squad, and forward-deploying advanced capabilities.
That's the core of it. But all this increased military interaction in contested areas, it just inherently elevates the risk of miscalculation, escalation.
Okay, so military power is key, but economic leverage feels like an equally potent weapon in this new Cold War. Battles over chips, financial systems, energy.
Absolutely. Let's dive into that chip war. The U.S. has been progressively tightening export controls on advanced semiconductors and the manufacturing equipment. October 22, October 23, December 24, more blacklisting in March 25.
Trying to curb China's military and AI progress.
That's the stated goal, but China is pushing hard for self-sufficiency, domestic innovation. We saw Huawei launch products with advanced domestic chips in 2024.
A big step for them.
Definitely. And in Feb 2025, Alibaba unveiled its own RCV CPU, the C930, seen as a direct response. January 2025, that startup DeepSeek revealed an open-source AI model rivaling Western ones. March 2025, reports of a carbon nanotube AI chip.
They're not standing still.
Far from it. Interestingly, in May 2025, the Trump administration reportedly eased some Biden-era AI chip export limits, maybe worried about pushing other countries towards Chinese tech.
A complex balancing act. Then there's BRICS, expanding significantly.
Yeah, no longer just Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Now Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, UAE, Indonesia. BRICS plus.
Representing a huge chunk of the world's population and GDP now.
Around 45% of population, over 35% of global GDP in PPP terms. Their goals seem clear: challenge Western economic dominance, displace the dollar, talking about BRICS pay, offer alternative development finance without Western conditions.
Sounds like a serious attempt to build an alternative pole.
It is. For members, it offers strategic diversification, counterbalancing U.S. influence, geopolitical prestige, a platform for the global South.
But can they act cohesively? So much internal diversity. Different political systems, economies, even conflicting interests like India and China.
That's the big question. Internal diversity could definitely complicate unified action.
And the Ukraine war keeps reshaping energy politics. The EU pushing hard for independence from Russian energy.
Aiming for no Russian gas by end of 2027, no new spot contracts by end of 2025, according to that May 2025 roadmap. Sanctions on Russia remain tight. The EU's 16th package hit the shadow fleet and banks in Feb 2025.
How's Russia adapting?
Redirecting exports. By April 2025, overall fossil fuel revenue was down, but China's seaborne crude imports were way up. China reportedly bought nearly half of Russia's crude exports between late 22 and April 25. Similar share for coal. India's a huge buyer, too.
But are sanctions having any effect on transport?
Some reports suggest G7 plus insured tankers are regaining share, possibly due to tougher enforcement against the shadow fleet, over 300 sanctioned by April 25.
And we can't forget trade tensions,
Right.
tariffs. Early 2025 saw renewed U.S.-China escalations.
Yeah, reports of new Trump admin tariffs may be 10% on all imports, potentially 145% on specific goods. China retaliated on U.S. agriculture, expanded rare earth export controls. The EU was prepping retaliation on U.S. steel aluminum tariffs, too.
Creates huge uncertainty, disrupts supply chains, complicates M&A companies thinking about separate supply chains for different regions.
Exactly. There were reports of a temporary de-escalation in May 2025, U.S.-China cutting some tariffs, China suspending some retaliation for 90 days, but the underlying issues haven't gone away.
So this chip war really highlights techno-nationalism. Control over critical tech is key for security and economy, leading to decoupling, maybe bifurcated tech ecosystems.
Right. And BRICS plus expansion is a clear geopolitical signal, a push for multipolarity. Including Iran shows that anti-hegemonic sentiment. But coherence remains a challenge.
And sanctions versus energy flows show this cat-and-mouse game. West tries to cut Russia's funding, Russia reroutes energy with China-India's help, develops alternative payment systems, leading to more fragmentation.
Fragmentation is a key theme. Which brings us to another crucial dimension: the war of narratives. Information control, shaping perceptions. It's critical.
We're seeing incredibly sophisticated disinformation and influence campaigns trying to sow discord, undermine trust.
Russia has been particularly active here, hasn't it? Aggressive subversion, sabotage, disinformation targeting Europe and the U.S. to weaken Western resolve, especially regarding Ukraine.
CSIS reported a near tripling of Russian physical attack subversive plots in Europe from 2023 to 2024.
Their methods are varied: disinformation, unattributed gray, falsely attributed black propaganda agents of influence, clandestine radio supporting extremist groups.
Examples like persistent GPS jamming in the Baltics and Poland, orchestrated illegal border crossings, even that alleged plot against the Rheinmetall CEO.
All fit the pattern. And their disinformation extends elsewhere, too, like those claims in Africa in 2023 about illicit U.S. biotesting.
And China's influence ops are expanding, too.
Significantly. The 2025 ODNI assessment talks about China's aggressive whole-of-government approach, using influence ops, cyber, IP theft, promoting narratives favorable to Beijing, highlighting Western weaknesses.
The rise of AI and deepfakes must be making this much worse.
Absolutely amplifying the challenge. The 2024 U.S. election saw generative AI used for fake images, videos, narratives. That fake video of the Haitian immigrant voting, reportedly Russian.
And deepfakes were a concern in India's 2024 elections, too. Manipulated videos of public figures.
Yes. Social media platforms are struggling, policy changes at Meta, challenges for X's civic integrity policies. It's tough. This convergence of state disinformation and easy AI tools creates a sort of democratization of propaganda.
Lowering the bar for impact, making attribution harder.
And these campaigns increasingly target existing societal fault lines, not just pushing an agenda, but deepening polarization, undermining democratic processes from within.
And it's global. Russia in Africa, U.S. elections, China's broader influence ops. It's a strategic effort to shape narratives, alliances, especially competing for influence in the global south.
A key battleground in this new Cold War.
Okay, so information warfare is critical, but underpinning so much of this is the intense race for technological supremacy. AI, quantum, space, surveillance, this feels fundamental.
It really is. Our sources frame this as potentially decisive for shaping global power. Let's look at the AI rivalry, U.S. versus China.
It reportedly entered a new and more dangerous phase in May 2025.
That was the assessment. Senate hearings voiced concerns the U.S. lead had narrowed significantly, maybe just mere months. China's DeepSeek AI, developed with modest resources, was called an AI Sputnik moment by some.
Wow. So the U.S. leads in breakthrough innovation, but China excels at scaling and deployment, helped by state coordination, lower energy costs.
That seems to be the dynamic. The U.S. is pushing adoption of its AI infrastructure globally, OpenAI for countries, Microsoft's Europe data centers, and that reported plan by the Trump admin to ease AI chip export rules might be part of boosting U.S. tech adoption.
Competition for talent must be fierce too. China trying to reverse brain drain, while U.S. policies might push talent elsewhere.
A major factor. And then there's quantum computing. The race is heating up globally.
Late 2024 saw breakthroughs reported from both U.S., Google's Willow, and China. Tianyan 504 with over 500 qubits.
Yes. The big strategic concern is quantum computers breaking current encryption. That would upend global security.
China's pursuing a dual strategy: quantum supremacy and quantum-resistant networks, like the MISHIS satellite and that huge QKD network.
Exactly. And the UN declaring 2025 the International Year of Quantum Science shows its global importance.
The tech competition also extends to surveillance tech and export controls, right? China hitting back with its own restrictions.
Yeah, facing U.S. restrictions, China's getting more assertive. October 2024, component export restrictions hit Skydio, the U.S. drone maker. December 2024, banned gallium-germanium exports to the U.S. after new U.S. chip controls.
Part of building national resilience, developing offensive economic tools.
Though that reported May 2025 trade deal saw China temporarily suspend some retaliatory controls as part of a tariff reduction.
And finally, the new space race. Very military focus now.
Increasingly seen as a critical military domain, China's reportedly rapidly developing weaponized space platforms, anti-satellite weapons, co-orbital interceptors, directed energy, large unmanned space planes, maybe even interceptors launched from their Tiangong station.
Russia's active too, practicing attacks, working on space-based nuclear concepts.
That's the concern. In response, the U.S. Space Force is ramping up significantly, planning over 100 new satellites in 2025 to boost resilience, maintain space, and cyber superiority.
So the AI race is now about global infrastructure, data centers, cloud, energy, and talent, forcing middle powers to choose sides.
Or risk falling behind. And quantum presents this Y2Q threat to cybersecurity, driving the race for quantum-resistant cryptography. China's QKD network is an example there.
And space is actively becoming militarized. Offensive and defensive capabilities, turning orbit into a potential battlefield, risking terrestrial infrastructure.
A very dangerous trend.
This new Cold War isn't just about individual nations, it's dramatically reshaping global alliances too. Traditional ones are adapting, new groups are emerging. Let's start with NATO.
NATO's definitely in a period of major strategic adaptation. Their 2022 strategic concept called Russia the most significant and direct threat, but also addressed China's systemic challenges.
Ukraine acted as a catalyst.
Huge catalyst. Reinforced the eastern flank, enhanced readiness. They're continuing Ukraine support via the Comprehensive Assistance Package, now multi-year. And that new NATO-Ukraine Tech Center in Poland opened Feb 2025 to institutionalize lessons learned, improve interoperability.
What's their main focus for 2025?
Purportedly developing a more confrontational long-term strategy towards Russia. But defense spending remains contentious, the U.S. pushing allies towards potentially 5% of GDP by the June 25 summit.
While many struggle to meet the current 2% target.
Exactly. Interestingly, NATO is also deepening cooperation with Indo-Pacific partners, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, on shared concerns about the rules-based order, and China.
And then BRICS plus OWN, as we discussed, with its new members positioning itself as a significant force. That Kazan summit in October 2024 was seen as a diplomatic win for Russia, despite sanctions.
Their stated aims remain challenging Western dominance, advocating multipolarity, pursuing de-dollarization like BRICS pay. It offers members prestige, diversification, a global South platform.
But again, that internal diversity, political systems, economies, India-China friction, could hinder unified policies and cohesion.
It remained a key challenge for the bloc.
The sources also highlight these pivotal powers navigating the divide. India seems particularly complex.
Uniquely so, member of BRICS plus A, but key in the Quad countering China. Pursuing strategic autonomy nuanced on Ukraine while deepening U.S. defense ties. That U.S.-India compact in Feb 2025, a 10-year framework, hosted Malabar in 24, hosting Quad Summit in 25, faces direct China competition in South Asia-Indian Ocean.
And Turkey, NATO member but acting very independently.
Increasingly so, maintaining dialogue with both Russia and West. Brokered the grain deal, prisoner swaps. But buying Russian S-400s, deepening energy economic ties with Moscow-strained NATO relations, Russia likely sees Turkey's independence as leverage.
ASEAN nations are in a delicate spot too, balancing U.S. and China.
A very delicate balance. Both are major economic security partners, officially striving for ASEAN centrality, deepening economic ties with China record trade in 2023. But public opinion in many states favors the U.S. for security, worried about China's assertiveness in the South China Sea. U.S.-ASEAN dialogue continues, but the bloc struggles with unity, navigating pressures like BRICS versus U.S. scrutiny.
And African nations, diversifying partnerships, strengthening intra-African trade.
Yes, attracting FDI from more sources beyond just Western aid. Remittances FDI now exceed U.S. aid. The African Union aims for a more assertive role, leveraging G20 membership. The continent's youth, agriculture, digital growth are seen as strength.
So traditional alliances like NATO are broadening focus to China while managing internal issues like spending, policy differences like Turkey.
While new blocs like BRICS Plus signal a desire for multipolarity, but effectiveness hinges on managing internal diversity and China's influence.
And these pivotal middle powers, India, Turkey, ASEAN, African nations gain importance navigating the U.S.-Russia-China rivalry. Their choices shape the balance. Their reluctance for rigid blocks creates a fluid landscape.
A very dynamic picture.
And the impacts of all this, they're rippling across the globe, affecting stability, trade, governance, even individual lives.
Our sources strongly suggest the intensifying U.S.-China tech competition is a major threat to global stability, fostering economic fragmentation, geopolitical tensions, raising miscalculation risks.
Davos 2025 described it as highly unpredictable, one of the most divided times since the Cold War.
And there's concern regional conflicts could escalate more easily, draw in bigger powers. The pressure to choose sides deepens divisions, erodes collective security mechanisms.
The impact on trade and supply chains sounds profound too. This new fragmentation, protectionism, tariffs, export controls.
Forcing multinationals to rethink supply chain resilience, explore regionalization. A late 2024 report said around 80% of firms had significant disruptions.
And while direct U.S.-China trade might decouple somewhat, the global chains are just rerouting complexly.
Often, yes. The IMF warned deep separation could cut global GDP by 7% long-term, hitting developing economies hardest.
We're also seeing this framed as democracy versus authoritarianism again.
Increasingly so. Early 2025 reports showed a worrying trend towards authoritarianism. VDEM Institute said autocracies, 91, outnumber democracies, 88, globally for the first time in decades. Around 40% of the world under authoritarian rule.
What's driving that democratic decline?
Factors include erosion of free expression. 44 countries saw increased censorship online control in 2024. Worryingly, even established democracies show illiberal tendencies, pressure on judiciary, media, civil society.
And the reported dismantling of U.S. aid by a new U.S. administration is seen as a blow to global democracy support.
By some analysts, yes.
Historically, geopolitical competition often squeezes civil liberties, expands surveillance. Is that happening now?
The focus on cyber threats, disinformation, tech control creates a pretext for expanded surveillance, speech restrictions in the name of national security. It's a delicate balance between security and rights.
History like the Red Scare shows how fear can lead to repression.
Exactly. This new Cold War accelerates economic tech fragmentation, making the world less efficient, prone to shocks. It erodes our capacity for collective action on global challenges, climate, pandemics, nukes.
The ideological contest is about which system delivers stability, prosperity, security, influencing global trends.
That seems to be the core of it. And pervasive cyber threats, disinformation, create a climate where states argue for more power, potentially undermining democratic values.
So the world of 2025 really does feel like it's at a significant crossroads. The future trajectory isn't set. Our sources point to several potential scenarios. Understanding these is crucial for policymakers and for us. Let's start with maybe the hopeful one. Détente 2.0. Is there a path to cooperation?
It's a possibility. Envisions relaxed tensions after prolonged conflict or stalemate, maybe war fatigue like in Ukraine, could create space for renewed limited cooperation, arms control, crisis management. Paralyzed bodies like the OSCE might find a modest role for dialogue.
But comprehensive cooperation seems far off.
Likely requires over a decade, maybe a major global crisis or leadership changes, and substantial European efforts on defense strategic autonomy if U.S. engagement wanes.
Okay, then the much more concerning possibility, escalation. Cold War turning hot.
Alarmingly, sources suggest a realistic possibility of direct military conflict between major powers, potentially nuclear. Tensions with China, Russia, North Korea create this scenario.
That Atlantic Council survey. 40% sketching another world war by 2035. 45% anticipating Russia-NATO conflict within 10 years.
Worrying numbers. Flashpoints like Taiwan, South China Sea, Ukraine carry substantial escalation risks. And remember that 2022 U.S. intel assessment about Putin potentially using tactical nukes if encircled in Kherson. Reportedly a 50% chance assessed them.
Sobering. Preventing conventional war escalating to nuclear is paramount.
The ultimate challenge.
And the third scenario may be the most likely near term. The long game. Continued proxy and digital warfare. Cold War 2.0 intensifying.
Yes, analysis suggests this is the most probable near to medium-term future. Persistent U.S.-China rivalry, Russia-West confrontation, military nuclear posturing, deepening economic tech decoupling, intensifying ideological polarization.
With the main battle lines over transformative tech. AI, chips, quantum, biotech.
According to commentators like George Takei, yes. This implies ongoing sophisticated cyber warfare, space militarization, new proxy conflicts, sustained sanctions, pervasive AI-augmented disinformation, a tense equilibrium.
No large-scale direct conflict, but constant tension, miscalculation risk, struggle for marginal advantage.
Exactly.
Which scenario plays out seems to depend on so many factors. Geopolitics, domestic politics in the U.S., China, Russia leadership, economy, public opinion.
And the actions of those pivotal middle powers. India, Brazil, Turkey, ASEAN, AU will also shape things.
Plus technological advances. AI, cyber, critical and dynamic. Could enable cooperation, but more likely fuel arms races, sophisticated proxy digital war. Governance of dual-use tech is central.
Absolutely. And escalation management becomes increasingly critical, especially with the conventional conflict risks between nuclear states. This new Cold War heightens miscalculation risk, requires robust crisis communication, clear red lines, understanding escalation dynamics, all seem weak right now.
A very precarious situation.
Indeed. The world of 2025 finds itself at a truly significant crossroads, shaped by these complex, interwoven rivalries that blend history with modern tech and shifting alliances.
Understanding these complex dynamics, the motivations of the key players, it's going to be absolutely crucial for navigating this uncertain era, hopefully for fostering stability and cooperation.
That's the hope.
The information we've discussed in this deep dive, as we mentioned, comes from diverse expert analyses of the 2025 ODNI Threat Assessment, CSIS reports on Ukraine, Russia's shadow war, the chip war, Carnegie Endowment insights on BRICS and nuclear risks, the Diplomat on tech rivalries.
A lot to dig into.
A complex web of information.
We really encourage you, our listeners, to explore these sources further if you want an even deeper understanding of these critically important issues. The path ahead in this new Cold War, well, it will undoubtedly demand continued learning, critical thinking, and active engagement from all of us.